Please, a nice, warm welcome to Eric Mcafee, the CEO of Aemetis.
I've said this before, but it deserves repeating. We all owe a debt of gratitude to Jim and Flavia Lane, Bill, and now his son, Mac, and the team that they pulled together of volunteers and paid staff so that we can all come together as a family of leaders and deal with the challenges of the world, partially by the strength of the friendships built over the many years that they've been doing the work. So if we could have a round of applause for Jim and Flavia, I appreciate it. And then there's another group that I think most of the leaders in the room are going to be excited about hearing about this, and that's a very excited long-term investor who, if you can imagine it, actually probably suffers more than any of the rest of us to actually fund what we do. And in the room are the United States Department of Agriculture loan program individuals who some work 16-hour days, stay weeks away from their families to do what? To review our loan proposals and to suffer the slings and arrows of all the uncertainties that we present to them in the industry and policies that are presented for us to have to deal with. And so I would like to give special recognition to Betsy Dirksen-Londrigan, Brian Wiles, the 9003 people, Chris Cassidy, the state people in California. You think we have it bad. They actually have the money. They have the pressure from us to say we're going to create jobs in the future. And all standing between us and that is a loan approval. And they actually have to process those loans and deal with all the realities of getting the funding going. But my encouragement is this. We at Aemetis have closed $50 million of actual cash funding, 20-year amortization, 80% guaranteed by the U.S. government, therefore about 9% interest rate. We've actually deployed that to build assets and jobs. We have another $100 million in process. And the suffering and hard work by the USDA loan team is a reason why that's happening in a market of debt and equity that would not have been willing to see past today's headlines. So I would encourage each of you to go to the USDA, explain to them your plans and ideas, and then be patient as they work through the realities of their internal issues. But they are there to fund and support you, and I would encourage you to help them, educate them, and support them as they deal with some of the vagaries of politics and other things. I'm going to do a quick introduction to Aemetis, and then I have three policy points that I would wish each one of us would take home and then call the necessary regulators and politicians so they could actually become reality. Aemetis is a vertically integrated business in many ways because we have taken our core biofuels assets and looked at the inputs and how we can decarbonize those inputs, and then the outputs and how we can make the most value out of it. And so we're about a $300 million revenues company. I founded it about 18 years ago. And we have, over the course of 18 years, had the great opportunity to take full advantage of some of the outside external opportunities. In the middle there is the largest ethanol plant in California. And it's a 65 million gallon ethanol plant in Modesto, California. We are also, because we produce ethanol, 28% of the inputs actually is animal feed, protein, oil, and fiber that feeds about 100,000 dairy cows. So for the last 10 years, we've been the largest animal feed producer in California. Now, in and of itself, that's a nice thought. But you know what animals do with it? They turn it into environmental pollution. 25% of the methane in California comes from dairy lagoons. So the Aemetis biogas business was birthed in 2018 specifically because state policy started to penalize dairies because they were emitting methane. So we are spending $400 million. We're about, I don't know, halfway through that right now, and are already positive cash flow in the business. I've already built 10 digesters for 10 dairies. We'll be at 16 dairies by the end of this quarter. And the use of that biogas, which used to be to go in the sky and be 84 times better at capturing heat than CO2, therefore 84 times worse as a greenhouse gas. We're now capturing it, turning into truck fuel, and actually replacing petroleum diesel, which in California, 77% of our petroleum products are directly imported from the Middle East. Only 23% are produced here domestically. So we are replacing imported crude oil and the pollution involved with that and creating domestic jobs by taking a waste stream that we produce. We produce the food that 80 dairies use to produce that waste stream. Now, it only took, I don't know, $100 million before we were able to build a 36-mile pipeline and a central cleanup unit in 4 years for the utilities, the final interconnect and everything else. But after the first 100 million, it was easy going. Why? Because all we have to do now is we have 48 signed dairies. We'll have 80 signed, in the next year or so. The guys that we feed food to, we're going to capture their biogas. And I mention that somewhat flippantly because oftentimes that's what we here in this room do, is that first 100 million is that heavy weight we have to carry over the top of the mountain. But once you're at the top of the mountain and investors and lenders can see, well, wait a minute, this business model works. Now we have another, 50 or 60 dairies that are pretty easy. The business model works, the infrastructure, the pipeline, everything's there. And so we're doing the same thing on the other side of the slide, number 3. We're the largest distillers corn oil producer in the state of California. That's what comes out of our ethanol plant. And so we actually have a fully permitted, only took 5 years and $43 million. And we had to buy a U.S. Army base. We bought a 125-acre, 710,000 square foot U.S. Army ammunition depot to save about 10 years of permitting. But despite a little bit of that effort, we now have a fully permitted 80 million gallon sustainable aviation fuel plant. We've signed $3.8 million of offtake agreements. And it's all because we produce the feedstock. And in India, we happen to be the largest biodiesel producer and happen to have a 50 million gallon tallow pretreatment facility in India. And so we happen to have our own feedstock. So again, it's an extension of the business model. We produce a feedstock. Looks like aviation needs to decarbonize. We went out and signed $3.8 billion of contracts with 10 airlines. And now we have a fully permitted plant. And in 2025, the job is to go ahead and do the project finance. And I didn't say this at the beginning, but I'm going to say it now. Thank you to Pat Gruber. Gevo and Montana Renewables received a combined $3 billion of DOE long-term financing for SAF, one from HEFA, a oil-based technology, and another from alcohol, which is Gevo. Why do I thank them? Well, first of all, his diligence and commitment to his technology is truly extreme. Second, is that now we're the number 2 to go in and say, oh, by the way, why don't we go ahead and do $1.5 billion of financing for a couple of these plants, just like those other guys did. And I would encourage everybody in the room, as much as possible, to try to watch closely as new patterns of financing and business models mature and try to adopt them into your technology. It makes a lot easier discussion with the finance people. Last little point I'm going to make is at the bottom, CO2 is produced by everything we do, biogas, the ethanol plant, and et cetera. It's about 400,000 tons. So a month ago, we drilled the first phase, the conductor well, for the first characterization well ever permitted for a private project in the state of California. And that conductor well is completed. We'll complete the characterization well early next year and sequester about 1.4 million tons. So this integrated business model works for us, doesn't have to work for you, but I very much encourage you to think about decarbonizing your inputs and your outputs, et cetera. There's a number of slides in here for the stock analysts. I apologize to the rest of you for having to look at them, but they're available online. This is our decarbonization of our ethanol plant. We've completed about a $12 million solar project, so we're using solar electricity, again, decarbonizing this facility. This is our gas cleanup hub. This was completed a couple years ago and has been generating revenue for us. Will be expanded eventually to a total of 80 dairies. This is the digester manure to biogas process. If you're not familiar with it, this is 25% of the methane emissions in California. But what's interesting is that the CO2 that's in the sky gets absorbed by a plant in photosynthesis, goes to a cow, comes out as what? CO2? No. Comes out as methane, CH4. Our job is to convert it back to CO2 by putting it into vehicles. And this is our sort of bird's eye view of the various projects we sign. and building out with a pipeline. And that's what digester looks like, and there's some data, again, mostly for the stock analysts, so you can see that we're on track and doing all the wonderful things we're talking about. Let's talk about some of the policies that are supportive of the kind of things that Aemetis is doing, and quite frankly, that many of your companies are doing. November 8th, we're going to have 20 years of mandates, hopefully, passed by the California Air Resources Board. This is the California Air Resources Board own chart for what they think the price of low carbon fuel standard credits will do in response to their policy. Now, this is a market that they created. They control the inputs and they control the outputs. Everybody here will be thinking about either California as a market or the other states adopting LCFS. So this is critical to almost anybody that's trying to create a low carbon molecule and sell it, frankly, anywhere in the world, because California's job is to lead the world's adoption of low carbon fuels. If this happens, about a year into it, the discussions you're going to have about your revenue models will be dramatically different. So first thing is, will it happen? The price of these credits crashed 8%, I think it was yesterday. And there are oil companies betting that it won't happen, that it'll get postponed again because it's postponed from March to November. So this is an area of uncertainty we all need to resolve so that we are all on the same page about what our low carbon fuel standard credit is. So if anybody happens to be here from the governor's office, an announcement of delay, which politically might be very convenient to say, well, let's just punt it another few months, is going to devastate the business plans of all those lenders who've been believing you're going to actually do it, and set back the industry 12 to 18, maybe even 24 months, as confidence goes out of the industry and then we recover again. This slide, this is kind of an inside baseball game, but you're all inside baseball. So let's talk about data. What is the energy density of a gallon of renewable natural gas? A gallon of a gas. Well, it happens to be 20 years ago we answered that question. I've asked this question to the U.S. Senate committee that actually wrote the law, Inflation Reduction Act, and they didn't know the answer. The answer is that the D3 RIN under the renewable fuel standard that was passed 20 years ago gives you 11.727 RINs for 1 million British Columbia units. Now, if you think about your businesses, many of you touch natural gas in one way or the other, and then as soon as you say natural gas, you're thinking about renewable natural gas because you want to decarbonize. If they get this calculation wrong, your economics just got massively changed. Why? Because 11.727 gallons times the dollar per gallon for every 50 points of decarbonization ends up being $99 per million British Columbia units. 1 MMBTU is $99.94. I have gotten opinions from $1, $7.20, all the way up to $99 on this. I've spent 3 weeks of my life in the last 6 months in Washington, D.C., meeting with politicians, lawyers, accountants, the IRS, the Chief Counsel's Office, USDA, and universally, people do not know how to take the energy density of 11.727 and multiply it times $8.50 to get this done. And in this room, we are all sitting on the risk that IRS gets this wrong in the next 60 days, and we all suffer from it forever. This is my last slide. When you go to the pumps in Midwest, you often see this. 15% ethanol, 30% ethanol, 85% ethanol as choices for consumers with different prices. I didn't audit the prices here, so I'm not sure these are current. But the reality is you're giving a consumer a choice for biofuels at the pump. California today mandates a 90% blend of petroleum gasoline. What did I just say? I said the inverse of a 10% ethanol blend. The inverse is this is the only state in the entire United States that mandates 90% petroleum gasoline. You have to do it. If you don't have 90%, you're violating the law. California is the same state run by a bunch of people saying we're going to lead in decarbonization and everything else. The fact that the state assembly 3 weeks ago voted 68-0 unanimously in favor of E15 and the Senate did not even take it up as a discussion item because the governor's office intervened and said, do not put that on my desk because I'll have to veto it, is an issue for every one of us. Why? The blocking of the adoption of biofuels through political and other means, environmental justice, et cetera, means your product, your decarbonized product, will be inhibited to go into the market. And as soon as you have too much supply, which ethanol is 18 billion gallons of supply with 14 billion gallons of market, you're going to have to sell your product at cost or worse. And that's what the ethanol industry does. So we would encourage you all to think about the political and regulatory support you can have for a mandate moving us from an 80% petroleum to an 85% in California. That's E15 across the country, and adopting E30, which is already appropriate in states like Nebraska. Because that is an opening of consumer choice and opening of lower carbon products into the marketplace. And here's why it matters to you. When you go to the USDA and say, I've got a great decarbonization of SAF, they're going to look in their portfolio and say, well, how did ethanol do? Because they funded billions of dollars into that. How did renewable diesel do? You're coming along a path of many projects that come before you. And if those are successful, your life is going to be much different than if they're not. E15 is the largest volume fuel and the largest amount of money ever invested in biofuels. We need it to be successful. So I appreciate you for your time, and I encourage you to visit Aemetis.com or find me at the conference. Take care.
Thank you, Eric, always for your thoughtful leadership. It's a leadership conference, and leadership thoughts are the currency of ABLC. So thank you.